situation here is not really that great. And thank you for coming despite the short notice. As you know, the governor announced his education reform proposal on February 8th during the State of the State address, and so the timeline between his announcement and the hearings at the Legislative Education Committee is really short, and so we want to make sure that we had an event before to inform the community about this, these proposals and give opportunity to community members to speak directly to the Legislative Education Committee on behalf of the proposals. So that's the reason why we have the time crunch. So thank you for coming. I know most of you. My name is Zambrano. I'm the Executive Director of Excel Bridgeport, and Excel Bridgeport is an education reform organization here in Bridgeport. We do advocacy specifically to address the systemic problems in the Bridgeport Public Schools. We work with parents and youth, and we also do advocacy at the district and city level. So we're really trying to build momentum, build a movement for change here in Bridgeport and in our public schools. So that's a little bit about what we do. And the purpose of this meeting, again, is to really inform the community about the components in this bill, in this proposal that the governor has announced. A lot of it is very dense. A lot of it is stuff that makes sense to people in the policy world, makes sense to people in education, but at the community level we really wanted to make the language and the proposals very accessible to you and to the community. So if there are any questions, we will have the question and answer section, so feel free to jot them down. We have ConnCAN here, and we have the Connecticut Policy Institute to answer any of your questions. So if there are points where you need more clarification, please feel free to ask a question during question and answer. So at this time, just to sort of frame the event, I want to invite Alex Spurrier from ConnCAN to go through a little bit about the education statistics currently facing us in the state of Connecticut. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Maria. As Maria mentioned, I'm Alex Spurrier from ConnCAN, and I'm sure all of you have heard kind of how massive the changes that Governor Malloy is proposing are. And what I'd like to do right now is just kind of set the context for why we need such systemic change and overhaul in our system of education in Connecticut. So to start off, let's take a look at where Connecticut stands and where our children are performing. If we look at 16 different achievement gaps in Connecticut, achievement gaps being the difference between either white students and students of color, students who are in poverty versus those who are not, students who are native English speakers versus those who are not. Connecticut is in the top 10 for the worst achievement gaps in all 16 categories, and we are the absolute worst in 7 of them. And this is across a bunch of different grade levels, so in both 4th grade...
Worst of all the states, right?
Out of all 50 states. Out of all 50 states, we have the worst achievement gaps in nearly every category for Hispanic and Latino students compared to their white peers. We place second in 8th grade reading, but otherwise it's the worst. But it kind of shows you the magnitude of the achievement gap in Connecticut. And a little bit more specifically, speaking to the challenges of low-income and Latino students in Connecticut, we see that when we compare them to students that are similar in other states, so low-income Latino students in other states across our country, our students in 4th grade math, our low-income Latino students, perform the worst in the nation. So putting that another way, a low-income Latino student in Maryland is performing almost 2 grade levels higher in 4th grade math. And while those students are still behind their white, more affluent peers in Maryland, they may be performing at a 3rd grade level when they're in 4th grade. That means that our low-income Latino students in Connecticut would be performing at a 1st grade level in 4th grade. So we have a crisis on our hands. If you bring that out to the high school graduation rates, the State Department of Education recently released for 2010. We see white students in 4 years graduate at about 89%. For African American and Latino students, that's over 20 points lower. Almost 2/3 of students graduate, meaning a full third do not if you're a student of color in Connecticut. And so with that, if Maria would like to come and speak a little bit more to how this kind of plays out in Bridgeport, specifically at the school level.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
So many of you are from our community, so most of the statistics that I'm going to share are not surprising at all to you. But I think that in the work that we do as community advocates and community leaders, it's really important for us to really agree and know the scale and the scope of the problem before we begin to address it. And so, where are we currently in Bridgeport? Every year, 3,000 kindergartners come into the Bridgeport Public Schools, and already the odds are stacked against them. The chances of them going to college is about 1 in 2. The chances of them being on grade level by the time they're in 3rd grade is about 25%. So by the age of 8, already they're 25% likely to be on grade level. So the chances of kids, even at a very young age, to succeed academically in this current system are not good. And so some of the stats, the achievement gap in Bridgeport, which is we define as the gap between wealthier and more affluent peers versus the children who are here in our community, which tend to be African American, Hispanic, and live in poverty. The gap is pretty large. So the achievement between affluent children and children in low-income communities is what we call the achievement gap. And in Bridgeport, the gap between Bridgeport and the state has not closed. In fact, it's remained pretty much constant for the past 4 years. Even more devastating is the fact that 95% of our elementary schools, almost all of our elementary schools with the exceptions of, I believe, one school, which is Multicultural Magnet, are performing below state average. So almost all of the schools are not really adequately preparing our students. Again, going back to the 3rd grade stat, researchers have found that if a child cannot read by the age of 8 on grade level, the chances of them catching up ever in their lifetime is incredibly slim. So by the time that Bridgeport 3rd graders are in 3rd grade, they're pretty much most of them are not on grade level. So already at 8 years old, they're really stacking up, the odds against them are really stacking up. At the high school level, we have similarly dismal results. Our high schools are chronically underperforming. We have large high schools, and our high schools on average are not preparing kids to go to college, and even the kids who are going to college are not prepared. And as someone who graduated from Central High School, Central Magnet, and really at the top of my class, I can attest to that. I left school, went to a college and university, and was not prepared. So even the kids that do graduate, do go to college, are still not at the level that they need to be. And this is a Ed Week graduation rate. Education Week has a formula for assessing graduation rates. The formula that the state previously used made the graduation rate in Bridgeport a little bit higher, but the actual number is about 55% of our high school students are actually finishing high school within 4 years. Compared to the state, which we're almost at 80%, there's definitely a big gap, and nationally across the country it's about 70%. So on those two metrics, Bridgeport is still underperforming. And across urban districts, our peer districts here in Connecticut, namely Hartford, New Haven, Waterbury, Stamford, communities that have similar demographics, have similar socioeconomic challenges that Bridgeport faces. Bridgeport is the lowest performing school district out of the peer districts. And especially the gap gets just even wider when we talk about state averages. So the conclusion really is that we need better schools. And in fact, the opportunity that we provide children in terms of the educational quality in our schools is something that needs to be enhanced in order to give kids an opportunity to go to college, or if they don't want to go to college, give them the skill sets that they're going to need to be successful in a career of their choice. And so we know we need better schools, and in fact we know that it's possible because across the state we've seen examples of exceptional schools educating children in poverty very successfully, and in fact we have some of those schools already in our community. So this is actually comes from a ConnCAN report of schools in Connecticut that are schools in low-income communities that are successfully educating kids in poverty. And the ones in blue are actually schools here in Bridgeport. So we know that it's possible, and in fact we know what we have to do in order to get to these results, and it's just a matter of how are we going to do that and what are the steps that we're going to take, both as policy leaders, as community leaders, and just as citizens of Connecticut. So I want to also now pass this off back to Alex, because Alex is going to go through pretty in detail the contents of the governor's education reform proposals. And again, if you have any questions for Alex, please feel free to, well, I don't know, I'll leave it up to Alex. Would you like them to interrupt you, or would you like them to have the Q&A later?
why don't I go through kind of the overview, and then we can go back, and because I'm sure you guys will have tons of questions, so if you just kind of want to jot them down